Hello and welcome. Just as the human body is composed of systems and their organs, so are game objects composed of components and their properties. Components determine the appearance and functionality of game objects. This cube has a transform component, which in turn has position, rotation, and scale properties. To edit the transform values, you either do so in the scene view using the gizmo arms, or enter values directly. Or click and drag to left or right to increase or decrease values respectively. Some property values references other objects in your project. For example, the mesh filter references a cube mesh, and the materials property is referencing default material. Components can also be rearranged by moving up or down. An entire component can be removed, its property values reset or copied. Every game object has a transform component and thus cannot be removed. The transform component of a game object determines the position, rotation, and scale of the object. The color palette allows you to choose a color for your material. You can also add additional components or scripts to your game objects. A game object can be duplicated by selecting it in the hierarchy window and pressing Ctrl+D on your keyboard. Game objects can be renamed from the hierarchy window or from the inspector window. You can make a game object parent or child of another object simply by dragging one game object onto another. The transform values of child objects are relative to their parents. These relative or local transform values are what is displayed in the inspector window for a selected child object. Changing the transform values of a parent object affects those of the children in well space. Non-uniform scaling is when the scale values of a game object are not all the same. Non-uniform scaling has a negative impact on rendering performance. In addition, certain components do not fully support non-uniform scaling. For example, the shape of a sphere collider will remain circular or spherical even if the sphere game object is elliptical. Other components that do not fully support non-uniform scaling are capsule collider, light, and audio source. A child game object, when it is rotated relative to its non-uniformly scaled parent object, may appear skewed. So avoid non-uniform scaling whenever possible. Deactivating a game object disables everything about the object in your scene, including its components and scripts. Deactivating a parent game object also disables all of its child objects, but that does not set the active state of any child object to false. When a child object is active, but its parent is disabled, the child object will be disabled in the scene as far as it remains a child of this deactivated parent. But when this child is assigned an active parent or no longer a child object, it will be active. In the same way, if a child game object is disabled, activating its parent object does not activate the child. The final thing to consider in this lesson is about prefabs. A prefab is like a template for a game object, including its components and properties. To create a prefab, simply drag and drop a game object from the hierarchy window into a folder in the project window. Multiple instances of a prefab can be created across multiple scenes in your project. When a prefab is edited, all existing instances are automatically updated. A prefab instance can be edited to override its prefab assets. For example, a component can be added or removed. Or a property value can also be changed on a prefab instance, or it can be made the parent of another object. Instance override can be applied to a prefab asset. The addition or removal of a component on a prefab instance or a change in any of its property values can be applied to its prefab asset. An applied override is no longer an override. The modification reflects on every instance of that prefab asset. A prefab instance can be unpacked completely, thus turning it into a regular game object. In conclusion, we have seen what game objects and components are and how to work with them. Finally, we've learned how to create and use prefabs. Please subscribe to this channel for more videos. Thank you.